If you have been reaching for a cup of tea after dinner because someone told you it would calm your stomach, there is a real chance that one of your favorite teas is doing the exact opposite, quietly relaxing the very muscle that is supposed to keep stomach acid where it belongs. You probably did not think twice about it. Tea feels gentle. Tea feels like the safe choice, the thing you drink when coffee feels too harsh and soda feels too sweet. But gastroesophageal reflux disease, the condition we call GERD, does not care about reputations. It cares about chemistry. And some of the teas marketed as soothing for digestion are, for a person with reflux, a slow trigger disguised as self-care. I want to start with that warning because I see this mistake constantly in people who are otherwise doing everything right. They have cut back on fried food. They have stopped eating late at night. They are proud of themselves, and they should be. And then they finish a meal, pour a cup of something herbal, and within 30 or 40 minutes, they feel that familiar burn climbing up behind the breastbone. They assume it was the meal. It was the tea. So today we are going to do two things, and we are going to do them clearly, without turning this into a list of vague tips. First, I will walk you through 3 teas that genuinely help people with GERD, and more importantly, I will explain the actual physiological reason each one helps, so you understand the mechanism instead of just memorizing a name. Second, I will walk you through 3 teas that have a health halo around them, that show up constantly in wellness articles and herbal medicine shops, but that can make reflux worse in a meaningful number of people. By the end of this episode, you will know exactly what to look for on a tea box, and exactly what questions to ask yourself before you trust a label that says digestive support. Let's begin with the mechanism, because nothing in this episode will make sense without it. At the bottom of your esophagus, where it meets your stomach, there is a ring of muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter. Think of it as a one-way valve. When you swallow, it opens to let food and liquid pass into the stomach, and then it closes again. That closing is what keeps stomach acid, which is extremely acidic, contained where it belongs. In people with GERD, that valve does not close properly, or it closes but relaxes too often at the wrong moments, allowing acid to splash upward into the esophagus, which was never built to tolerate that level of acidity. The burning sensation you feel is literally tissue damage in progress, even if it is mild and temporary in any single episode. Now here is the part that matters for our topic today. Certain substances, when they reach the stomach, trigger that lower esophageal sphincter to relax even when it shouldn't. Caffeine is one of the most well-documented triggers. Peppermint oil is another. And this surprises almost everyone, because peppermint has been marketed as a stomach soother for generations. Citrus oils and certain other plant compounds can do the same thing. So when we talk about which teas help and which teas hurt, we are really talking about which teas relax that valve and which ones don't, plus which ones reduce acid production or speed up stomach emptying in a helpful way. Let's start with the 3 teas that actually help, and I want you to pay attention to the why behind each one, not just the name. The first is chamomile tea. Chamomile has a long history in traditional medicine for digestive complaints, but the more interesting part, for our purposes, is what modern research has found about its anti-inflammatory compounds, particularly a flavonoid called apigenin. Chamomile does not appear to relax the lower esophageal sphincter the way caffeine or peppermint oil can. Instead, it appears to have a calming effect on the smooth muscle of the digestive tract in a way that supports normal motility rather than working against it. And it may help reduce the inflammation that chronic acid exposure causes in the esophageal lining over time. Many of my patients describe chamomile as the tea that lets them wind down in the evening without that uneasy feeling in the chest they get from other warm drinks. If you're going to try one new tea this week, this is the one I would point you toward first, ideally an hour or so after your evening meal, not immediately when your stomach is still actively digesting a large amount of food. The second is licorice root tea, but I need to be precise here, because this is a case where the details genuinely matter for your safety. Licorice root has been studied for its potential to support the protective mucus lining of the esophagus and stomach, which can help buffer tissue against acid exposure. There is a specific form, called deglycyrrhizinated licorice, often abbreviated DGL, which has had a compound called glycyrrhizin removed. Glycyrrhizin is the part of licorice that, in large quantities or with prolonged daily use, can raise blood pressure and disrupt your potassium levels, which is a serious concern, especially for anyone managing cardiovascular health. If you choose a licorice tea, especially as a daily habit, please make sure it specifies deglycyrrhizinated licorice, or DGL, on the label, and talk to your doctor first if you have high blood pressure or kidney concerns. With that distinction in mind, DGL tea is genuinely one of the more evidence-supported options for people managing reflux symptoms because it works on protecting the lining rather than trying to neutralize acid directly. The third is ginger tea, but in a specific way that surprises people because ginger has a reputation as being spicy or heating, which sounds like the opposite of what someone with a sensitive stomach would want. In reality, ginger has been studied extensively for its ability to speed up gastric emptying, meaning it helps food move out of the stomach and into the small intestine more efficiently. Why does that matter for reflux? Because the longer food and acid sit in your stomach, the more opportunity there is for that acid to be pushed upward, especially if you lie down, bend over, or even just slouch in a chair after eating. By helping the stomach empty a bit faster, ginger can reduce the window of time during which reflux is likely to occur. The key is moderation and form. A mild ginger tea, made from a small amount of fresh ginger steeped in hot water, tends to be well tolerated. Concentrated ginger shots or very strong ginger supplements, on the other hand, can sometimes irritate a stomach that is already inflamed. So this is a case where the dose genuinely makes the difference between helpful and harmful. This is also a good moment to mention something that connects directly to what we are talking about. If this kind of explanation, the kind that actually walks you through the mechanism instead of just handing you a list, is useful to you, this channel exists specifically to do that, episode after episode, for every part of living with reflux. Subscribing costs you nothing, and it means you won't miss the episodes where we go deeper into specific triggers, specific medications, and specific situations that affect people with GERD every single day. If you found this helpful so far, tapping that like button is a small thing on your end, but it tells us clearly that this kind of detailed, no-nonsense explanation is what people actually want, and that shapes what we make next. Now let's talk about the 3 teas that have built a reputation as gentle, healthy, soothing choices, but that can quietly work against you if you have GERD. The first, and the one that will surprise the most people watching, is peppermint tea. I want to be very clear about why this is on the list, because it is not because peppermint is inherently unhealthy. Peppermint is genuinely useful for some digestive issues, particularly irritable bowel syndrome, where it can relax intestinal spasms. The problem, specifically for reflux, is that menthol, the active compound in peppermint, has a documented relaxing effect on smooth muscle, and that includes the lower esophageal sphincter we talked about earlier. When that valve relaxes at the wrong time, acid has an easier path upward. So a tea that is marketed broadly as digestive support can be exactly the wrong choice for one specific digestive condition while being a reasonable choice for another. This is a perfect example of why a label that says good for digestion is not specific enough information for someone managing GERD. If peppermint tea is something you drink regularly and you also deal with reflux symptoms, that connection is worth paying attention to, and many of my patients have been surprised at how much their symptoms improved simply by removing this one habit. The second is hibiscus tea. Hibiscus has become enormously popular in wellness circles for its antioxidant content and its tart, refreshing flavor, and there is legitimate research on hibiscus supporting healthy blood pressure. But hibiscus tea is also notably acidic, with a pH that can sit in a range similar to some fruit juices. For someone with a healthy esophagus, that acidity is not a major concern. For someone whose esophageal lining is already inflamed from repeated acid exposure, adding another acidic liquid on top of that irritation can intensify the burning sensation, even though the tea itself contains no caffeine and no obvious trigger ingredient in the way coffee or peppermint do. This is a case where the issue is not a special compound relaxing a muscle. It is simply straightforward acidity meeting already damaged tissue. If you love hibiscus tea, you do not necessarily need to eliminate it forever, but pay attention to whether your symptoms show up specifically after drinking it, and consider diluting it with extra water or limiting it to times when your stomach is not already irritated. The third is green tea, and I want to be careful here because green tea has so many well-documented health benefits, from cardiovascular support to its role in healthy metabolism, that I am not telling you to abandon it entirely. The issue, specifically for reflux, is twofold. First, green tea does contain caffeine, generally less than coffee, but still a meaningful amount. And caffeine is one of the better studied relaxants of the lower esophageal sphincter. Second, green tea tends to be more acidic than people expect, and on an empty stomach, particularly first thing in the morning before eating anything. That combination of caffeine and acidity can be enough to trigger symptoms in people whose reflux is already poorly controlled. The practical takeaway here is not necessarily to eliminate green tea, but to pay attention to timing. Drinking it with food, rather than on an empty stomach, and choosing a weaker brew rather than a strong one, can make a real difference for some people, while others may need to switch to a decaffeinated version or step away from it for a period to see if their symptoms improve. I want to pause here and ask you something directly, because I genuinely want to know, and it helps shape what we focus on in future episodes. If you are watching this and you recognized your own habits in either list, whether it was the chamomile you already loved or the peppermint you didn't realize was working against you, tell us in the comments which city or country you are watching from right now. I have heard from people managing this same condition on nearly every continent, and it always reminds me that reflux does not care about geography, climate, or cuisine. It shows up in people who grew up drinking strong coffee every morning and in people who never touch caffeine at all. Knowing where you are watching from helps me understand just how widely this affects people, and it genuinely changes how I think about future topics for this channel. Let's go a layer deeper now, because understanding which teas help and which ones hurt is useful, but understanding how to actually use that information day to day is what will change how you feel. Timing matters as much as content. Even a tea from the helpful list, like chamomile, can behave differently depending on when you drink it. Drinking a large cup of any warm liquid immediately after a big meal increases the total volume in your stomach, and a fuller stomach has more pressure pushing upward against that lower esophageal sphincter. This is simple physics, not chemistry. So even with a tea that does not chemically relax the valve, drinking it in large quantities right after eating can still contribute to reflux symptoms simply through volume and pressure. The practical fix is straightforward. Wait at least 30 minutes after a meal before having a cup of tea, and keep portions moderate rather than drinking 2 or 3 large cups back to back. Temperature plays a smaller, but still real, role for some people. Very hot liquids can occasionally trigger esophageal sensitivity in those who already have some degree of inflammation from chronic acid exposure. This does not mean you need to drink lukewarm tea forever, but if you notice that your symptoms seem worse specifically with very hot beverages, letting your tea cool for a few extra minutes before drinking it is a small, easy adjustment. Posture after drinking tea matters more than most people realize. Reflux is, in part, a problem of gravity working against you. Lying down, reclining in a chair, or even sitting in a deeply hunched position can make it easier for stomach contents, including whatever you just drank, to move upward. If you have a habit of having your evening tea while lying in bed reading or watching something, that habit alone, independent of which tea you chose, could be contributing to nighttime symptoms. Staying upright for at least an hour after any beverage or meal is one of the simplest, least discussed, and most effective changes a person with GERD can make. I also want to address something I hear often, which is the assumption that because a tea is labeled herbal or natural, it must be automatically safe for a sensitive digestive system. Natural simply means the source is a plant rather than a synthesized compound. It says nothing about whether that plant's active compounds happen to interact well or poorly with your specific condition. Peppermint is natural. Citrus is natural. Many plants contain compounds that are genuinely powerful, which is exactly why some of them can either help or hurt you, depending on the situation. The herbal aisle of a grocery store is not a uniformly safe zone for reflux. It is simply a different category of ingredients that each need to be evaluated on their own, the same way we evaluate medications, foods, and supplements. This brings up another important point. Tea is not a substitute for medical treatment when GERD is frequent or severe. If you are experiencing heartburn more than twice a week, if you are waking up at night with a burning sensation or a sour taste in your mouth, or if you have noticed any difficulty swallowing, unexplained weight loss, or persistent hoarseness, these are signs that deserve a conversation with a doctor, not just a change in your tea cabinet. GERD that goes unmanaged over years can lead to complications, including damage to the esophageal lining and, in some cases, changes to the cells of the esophagus that require monitoring. Tea choices are a meaningful piece of managing day-to-day comfort, but they sit alongside medical evaluation, not in place of it. Let's talk for a moment about how to actually build a tea habit that supports your reflux management instead of working against it. Because I think the most useful thing I can give you today is not just a list, but a simple decision-making process you can apply to any tea, even one we haven't specifically discussed. First, check the ingredient list for peppermint, spearmint, or any mint family ingredient if you know mint affects you specifically, since not everyone with GERD reacts to mint the same way, but a meaningful number of people do. Second, consider the acidity. Hibiscus, citrus blends, and many fruit-forward herbal teas tend to sit on the more acidic end, and if you already have noticeable esophageal irritation, that acidity adds to existing inflammation rather than soothing it. Third, check for caffeine, including in teas you might not expect, since some green tea and white tea blends contain more caffeine than people assume, and caffeine remains one of the most consistently documented triggers for lower esophageal sphincter relaxation. Fourth, and this one is often overlooked, pay attention to how your body responds over a 1 or 2 week period rather than judging a single cup. Reflux can be inconsistent, influenced by stress, sleep, and the rest of your diet that day. So a single bad night after a new tea is not always conclusive, but a clear pattern over several attempts usually is. I also want to mention fennel tea briefly, because it comes up often in questions from viewers, and it sits in an interesting middle ground. Fennel has traditionally been used to ease bloating and gas, and unlike peppermint, it does not have the same well-documented relaxing effect on the lower esophageal sphincter. For some people with GERD, especially those whose symptoms are tied closely to bloating and excess gas pressure in the stomach, fennel tea can be a reasonable, generally well-tolerated option. It is not as strongly studied for reflux specifically as chamomile, DGL licorice, or ginger, but it is a far safer bet than peppermint or hibiscus for most people, and it is worth mentioning so you have a fuller picture rather than just 3 options to alternate between. Something else worth understanding is why so many of these wellness teas got their reputation in the first place. Historically, herbal teas were grouped broadly under categories like calming, soothing, or good for digestion, based on centuries of general use across a wide range of complaints, not based on the specific mechanics of acid reflux as we understand it today through modern gastroenterology. Peppermint earned its soothing reputation largely because of how it helps with bloating, gas, and intestinal cramping, conditions where relaxing smooth muscle is exactly what you want. The problem is that the same muscle relaxing property that helps lower in the digestive tract can work against you higher up at the esophageal sphincter. This is not a flaw in traditional knowledge. It is simply a reminder that good for digestion is too broad a category to apply uniformly, because digestion involves several different organs and several different kinds of muscle behavior, each with its own rules. If you've made it this far, you are clearly someone who wants to actually understand what is happening in your body rather than just collect a list of do's and don'ts. And that is exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. So if you have not yet subscribed, now is a good moment to do it, because the topics we cover next will build directly on what we just discussed, including the foods that interact with these same mechanisms and the specific lifestyle changes that make the biggest measurable difference for people managing GERD long-term. And if this episode helped you understand even one habit you didn't realize was a problem, leaving a like helps this kind of careful, mechanism-based explanation reach more people who are quietly dealing with the same thing you are. Let's bring this together with a few practical scenarios, because I think concrete situations make this easier to apply than abstract rules. Picture someone who has a cup of strong peppermint tea every evening after dinner because it has always felt soothing. If that same person also experiences regular heartburn, switching that evening tea to chamomile or a mild ginger tea for 2 weeks, while keeping everything else the same, is one of the simplest experiments they can run. If symptoms noticeably improve, that is meaningful information, not a coincidence, given what we know about menthol's effect on the lower esophageal sphincter. Picture another person who starts their morning with a strong green tea on an empty stomach because they are trying to cut back on coffee, believing it is the gentler choice. If that person experiences morning heartburn or a sour taste shortly after, moving that same tea to after breakfast, rather than before it, or switching to a smaller cup, can reduce the combined impact of caffeine and acidity hitting an empty stomach. Picture a third person managing reflux who also deals with frequent bloating and who has been told repeatedly that hibiscus tea is great for overall health. For this person, the acidity of hibiscus may be working against their esophageal lining even while supporting other aspects of health like blood pressure. In that case, switching to fennel tea, which addresses the bloating without the added acidity, may serve them better than hibiscus does, even though both are technically healthy choices in a general sense. None of these scenarios are about declaring any tea good or bad in an absolute sense. They are about recognizing that your specific condition changes what healthy means for your body, and that a tea that is wonderful for one person's blood pressure or stress levels can be quietly working against another person's esophageal lining at the very same time. I also want to briefly mention decaffeination because it comes up frequently. Decaffeinated green tea and decaffeinated black tea remove most of the caffeine, which addresses one trigger, but they do not remove acidity, and in some cases they do not remove every trace of caffeine either, since decaffeination processes vary and rarely reach 0%. So decaf is often a meaningful improvement, but it is not automatically a complete solution if acidity or other compounds are also playing a role in your symptoms. As we wrap up, here's what I want you to walk away with. Reflux is not caused by a single bad ingredient. It is caused by a specific mechanical and chemical situation, where the valve between your esophagus and stomach is relaxing more than it should, where your stomach contents are more acidic or more voluminous than your body can comfortably manage at a given moment. Chamomile, properly formulated DGL licorice, and mild ginger tea each work with that mechanism, either by supporting normal muscle behavior, protecting the esophageal lining, or helping your stomach empty more efficiently. Peppermint, hibiscus, and green tea, despite their broad reputations as healthy or soothing, can each work against that same mechanism for a meaningful number of people with GERD, whether through muscle relaxation, added acidity, or caffeine content. The goal is not to fear tea, and it is not to follow a rigid list forever without question. The goal is to understand why each of these effects happens, so that you can make informed choices about your own body, adjust timing and portion size intelligently, and recognize early when a habit that seems harmless might actually be part of what is keeping your symptoms going. If you found this useful, there is more waiting for you on this channel, because reflux touches nearly every part of daily life, from the food you eat to the way you sleep to the medications you may already be taking, and we go through each of those pieces with the same level of care and detail we just used for tea. Stay with us, because the next conversation about reflux is just as important as this one.